beautiful time of the year. Autumn, early fall here on the lower coast. A lot of wildflowers are blooming, the autumn bloomers I call them, and the landscape is taking on a very nice appearance, especially after a long hot summer like we have here. Goldenrod is beautiful, other things blooming. Morning times tend to be cooler. Afternoons still get hot, but at least in the mornings it's cool. It cools down in the evening. I want to thank you for watching this video. We're going to be looking at a few of the things that are available right now, resource-wise, and particularly here on the lower coast. And come along with me. Hey y'all, here's a little something I want to show you. What we have here is Saw Palmetto. Grows prolifically here along the Gulf Coast. I've even found it inland quite a ways. I'm down here along the river, so you're apt to hear a boat going by in just a minute. What I want to show you about the Saw Palmetto is the fruit that grows on these plants. You go digging around and stuff like this, you need to be extremely careful because it's a really good place for Mr. No-Shoulders to lay up. Here's a really good example of the fruit. It's ripe when it gets dark, black like that. It gets soft, and I'm not sure who I was reading or who I was listening to that mentioned that the fruit of the Saw Palmetto tastes something like a cross between, and it's very edible now, but it tastes like a cross between rotten cheese and tobacco juice. Well, I've been watching these all summer, or ever since they started putting on. And I've waited and waited because as my own, part of my own, there's a lizard just ran by, I don't know if you saw him or not. As part of my own experimental archaeology where wild edibles is concerned, I've been waiting on these to ripen to try. And I've got to tell you that whoever it was, I think it was Green Dean, something I read on one of his websites. But I've got to tell you that the description of a taste between rotten cheese and tobacco juice is just about as close as I can describe that. I would not want to have a steady diet of that stuff, but in a emergency situation, in a survival situation where you absolutely must ingest something that's nutritional, here's one for you. Let's look at something else while we're exploring. This is wax myrtle, also known as southern bayberry. And if you look, I hope this focuses on the little stems, on the little branches up in there. There's a lot of little small berries. Not only does the wax myrtle, or the leaves of it, make a good natural insect repellent if you crumble them, crush them up, and rub them on your skin. But you can collect these little berries, these little bluish, grayish colored berries, process them down, put them in some hot water and simmer them, and get the wax from them, and use that wax in candle making. Fish River, or at least this little part of it. The Spanish named it Rio Pescador, and we came along and the English changed the name. Let's look at this right here. This is Chinese tallow. It's not native to this country. It was brought in to South Carolina in the 1700s, and they began to propagate it, not because the wood is such a good wood. It's somewhere between a softwood and a hardwood. I have been able to obtain a friction fire with it. But this is our primary interest. The reason it was introduced into this country, into the South Carolina in the 1700s, and then here in lower Alabama in the early 1900s, is for this right here. We call these popcorn trees because when the seeds open, there's just a little cluster of white seeds there. And the reason this terribly invasive tree was brought here, and this stuff it has taken over coastal areas. It doesn't grow in cooler areas. You get just a little way inland and you don't find this. But those seeds are used just like the seeds of the wax myrtle, the southern bayberry. Put these in a pot of water, simmer them, get the wax, and use that in candle making. So let's look at a couple of more things. Talking about foraging wild edibles. A couple of things here that I want to focus in on. Little pile of, up north they call them acorns. Down here we pronounce that acorns. A good many of us do. That's what we grew up knowing it as, acorns. All acorns are not created equal. Some have more tannins in them than others, and they're a very viable source of nutrition. Wildlife love them, and they're also very fit for human consumption if you process them. Acorns have tannins in them that make them very, very bitter. And another thing that you'll find in them is a little grub. Not in every one, but quite often you'll find a little tiny grub in there. And I'm posting a picture of what they look like. And you can pick up a pocket full of these and put them in a container and just walk away from them, and in a day, 2, 3, ever how many, you can come back and that little grub will have eaten his way out through the hull and will be crawling around in that container. Now, what you have to do with the acorn is you have to leach the tannins out of them, and that's done a number of different ways. A lot of the Native Americans would harvest these and put them in a sack and submerge them in a creek and just leave them for quite a long period of time. These have been sitting in this little bowl of water for, I don't know, maybe an hour, hour and a half, and you can see how the water is beginning to turn yellow. And what you have to do is keep changing the water until it stops turning yellow. And how long does that take? I've done it for 2 or 3 days, and finally the the water would remain clear, and a lot of the yellow will have leached out of the acorn itself. And they're quite tasty. A number of different ways to process them. You can eat them just like they are. You can roast them and use them to make a coffee-like drink. You can dry them, grind them, use them as a flour, and it's a very, very useful thing to know in a long-term situation, especially. Just a little handful of seedling pecans that somewhere along the way the pecan orchards planted, and rain, squirrels, birds, whatever, they carried nuts all over into the woods, and these things will sprout and grow, and often they've got a really hard shell, but they're quite tasty and they're abundant. One of the things to be looking for, especially in a long-term situation. The thing about a pecan, one of the things about a pecan is that they don't have a long shelf life. What happens to them is they begin to turn rancid, and they're quite nasty once they begin. The oils in them begin to turn rancid, like any other kind of oil that is just very unpalatable. Let me say this. I've heard many people over the course of time say that, if things got really bad, that they would just go to the woods and live off the land. There's, kind of like the young fella on Swamp People once said, he says, "You think you can come down here and do this? Good luck to you." There's a lot to know. And one of the things that a lot of people, I believe, do not realize is that when you find yourself in a long-term situation, staying alive, foraging, hunting, fishing, those things become a full-time occupation, and it takes a lot of time to be able to process things. And just like this little bowl, sure, it took a few minutes to pick up those acorns, and just a few minutes to shell them out. But if I've got to wait 3 days or 4 days to be able to use that, I've got to stay on my A game, and I have to constantly be collecting and processing just in order to eat. And that doesn't take into consideration all the other aspects of survival. This is just one of those. So keep that in mind.